There's a second class of advertisement, which isn't about being showy. It's more about armaments. We see horns in a great diversity of animals. Darwin made a great case for these having an aesthetic as well as an aggressive purpose. I used to think that in beetles especially this was true until I found this photo that shows that they actually can use them to good effect in fights. Fighting over the girls is incredibly common in the living world and sometimes requires mostly just really large size. And so we see things like elephant seals turning each other into bloody masses of blubber when fighting over females. Elephant seals are 4 to 5 times the size of the males, or 4 to 5 times the size of the females. Gorillas are also much, much larger, the males, than the females. Very large sexual dimorphism. Both of these species, the large males guard and mate with a harem of females. So they have to protect those females from other males. Among animals, though, often the armaments, whether it's large size or horns, often serve to help avoid fights. A little bit of whose is bigger, and usually one of the males will run away before there's any serious bloodshed. Sometimes animals use a combination of these tactics, like prairie chickens. So clearly there's an interesting display going on. But these birds also fight extensively when they're on the lecking grounds. They go to these raised areas, large numbers of males, and fight. Show off for the females with a lovely little dance. And then the female decides which male gets her attention. They are adorable. The reason I bring this example up is because clearly the subtext of all of this is that the males are doing something and then the females are choosing. This was ridiculed in Darwin's day. Female animals are not thought to have the mental capacity for choice. Actually, Darwin also thought that human females just didn't have it going on in the intellectual department. I decided not to include the quote, but he does say that it's one of the ways that humans are sexually dimorphic. But I'll forgive him for that. Darwin took great pains to give lots of examples of how clearly females do choose when they're making decisions for food or for nesting sites. But it was the assumption that animals could have an eye for beauty that his contemporaries took issue with. But through modern research, we know that female prairie chickens really do choose among males. And there's something about that display that is part of her choice. So why are females choosy? They're often considered the choosy sex because they invest more in producing offspring. More in pregnancies, the famous Demi Moore shot. More in eggs. We have a kiwi up here, where the egg is pretty much as big as her whole body. And even in cases that are not so extreme, we know that, that eggs are larger than sperm. Even separate from the difference in the size of the gametes or the cost of pregnancy, there's often differences in parental care. Differences in breastfeeding, for example, if you're talking about mammals like us. Differences in provisioning of young at the nest. In the 1940s, Bateman predicted that because of these differences in investment, females should have a lower variance in reproductive success than males. Basically, female reproductive success is probably limited by the resources required to make those babies. And so you'd expect that females wouldn't differ too much in how many babies they could make. Males, though, should be limited instead by mating opportunities. Some males may be duds and some may be studs. Females should be choosy with their limited resources, but males should be competitive. This is true in elephant seals. And so what we see is that males, I know, really, do not try that at home. What we see is that both males and females, many of them produce 0 offspring over their entire lifetime. It's pretty hard out there on the beach. But if we just look at the difference in the maximum, female elephant seals, the maximum produced in this study population was 8. But the number of offspring weaned was as high as 100 for the males. All I can say, actually, 90 to 100 offspring, ouch. I mean, I feel sorry for the females sometimes. So does the male not choose? I mean, is that one that's having 100 babies with all those females? Is he not choosing? In many cases, the male's sole contribution to offspring is the time it takes for wooing and screwing. Maybe a little love juice thrown in. We have copious examples of males being, as Darwin so delicately put it, more eager to mate than females. He wrote that the males of all mammals eagerly pursue the females is notorious to everyone. And so we have examples of frogs mating, in this case, with a researcher's thumb. Frogs have been known to try to mate with goldfish, and they've drowned them. They are pretty eager to mate. It's not just mammals. And we have here a beetle that's pretty turned on by this stubby beer bottle. His sex organs are sticking out. Okay. We also know that salmon will spawn with pretty much any red object, such as the clipboards of the biologists that are studying them. Okay? So this behavior is probably especially common in males of species that have little time for the mating game. The pond is going to dry up. They've swum all the way upstream and they're going to die. And in those cases, mating with the first thing that comes along is probably a good strategy. Although there are many examples also of lekking behavior, what I was showing you in prairie chickens, where the males are lekking, we have almost no examples of this in female animals. Suggesting again that females may be less eager to mate, more coy, as Darwin put it, than males are. But we do know that the simplistic idea that males compete and females choose is just that. It's simplistic. When we study animals carefully, we see many examples of what we might call role reversal. In this case, the female loves them and leaves them, and the male raises the gaggle of kids. We see this in seahorses. This is a male, where the female puts the eggs in his pouch and he carries them to term. Giant waterbug males are the ones that carry the eggs around on their backs, and male jawfish are the ones that keep the eggs and brood them in their mouths. There's also cases of role reversal in birds. In red phalaropes, shown on the bottom, the male does the choosing because he's the one left holding the eggs, while the female goes looking for another young, impressionable guy to leave another clutch of eggs with. And in this case, the appearance of the animals is also role reversed. She's the sexy one. In other species still, monogamy is the norm, at least within a breeding season. And both parents are putting substantial effort into caring for the little ones. And in such cases like emperor penguins and TD monkeys, we actually see that males and females are pretty indistinguishable in appearance. They're probably both choosing to some extent. We know in cases like this, they're not just hopping in the sack or onto the iceberg or whatever with whoever comes along first. But when they're both putting large amounts of investments into the offspring, we don't see one sex being really sexy and advertising and the other sex not. They tend to look the same. So the bottom line, lesson number one for you to take home today: choosiness happens when there are differences in investment. And those differences in investment translate into differences in reproductive success. For the sex being chosen, it pays to advertise. So why do we advertise? We know why Calvin Klein advertises. We know also why Calvin Klein uses sex in advertising. It's all about show me the money, right? And sex appeal is the bait. But why do these whose is bigger tactics work in the mating game for animals? If you're well hung, I mean with antlers, of course, there's an obvious connection to access to females. But what about the case of the peacock? Why should the peahen be impressed? There's a couple of ideas that biologists have about this. The first is that advertisements are an honest indicator of some aspect of health. This is called the good genes hypothesis. The idea here is that only strong males with a good ability to access resources, basically get a lot of food, are able to grow really big tails, produce bright colors, sing for hours at a stretch, or put their free time into building a love nest for the bowerbirds. If they were genetic wimps, they wouldn't be able to make such fantastic advertisements. And we actually have some interesting data that supports this for peacocks. It turns out first of all, that peahens choose males based on the number of eye spots. So males with lots of eye spots wind up mating with a lot of different females, while males with fewer eye spots basically are duds. And of course, we know this because we go in and we snip off their tails, right? But the next step of this is we know that males that have fancier tails produce chicks that are heavier. And those heavier chicks have a greater survival ability and are more likely to grow up and raise peachicks of their own. We don't know the mechanism behind this. We don't know why it works. But what we do know is that those peacocks are not helping out at home. They're not helping to feed the babies. The peahens do all that themselves. There's some underlying genetic reason why this happens.